Some cold you can walk out of. You stamp your boots, you cuss a little, you find a fire, and by morning it's just a story you tell. And then there's the other kind. The kind that doesn't want your story, the kind that wants you. I've lived 71 winters in this high country, and I have buried men I loved and men I hated in the same frozen ground. And I am telling you now, I have never been so certain a night meant to take everything from me as the night this story begins. But that isn't why I'm telling it. I'm telling it because of who came out of that white dark to stand beside me. People I'd been taught my whole life to fear. People I'd have crossed a river to avoid. And in the space of one screaming night, everything I thought I knew about them and about me got pulled up by the roots and left bare in the snow. Stay with me. This one's going to cost you a little something to hear. It cost me a great deal more to live. Because at the end of it, somebody didn't come home, and somebody who never should have made it did. One last chance in the freezing cold, a rescue no one will forget. Least of all me. The wind found the gap under the barn door and made a sound like a hurt animal, and I remember thinking, before anything else went wrong that night, that it was going to be a bad one. I was 71 years old, and I still couldn't sleep through weather. My name doesn't matter much to the story, but folks up in the Chiricahua foothills called me Boone, and had for so long I'd near forgotten I was christened Elias. I ran 200 head, or I had, before the drought years thinned me down to something a man could count on his fingers and toes with a few left over. My wife had been gone 11 winters. My son had gone off to work the rails and sent money and never sent himself, which was its own kind of quiet grief a man learns to swallow with his coffee. So it was just me and the horses and a dog named Pettigrew who was too old to herd and too proud to admit it, and a habit I'd kept since Sarah passed. I wrote the weather down. Every night, in a ledger with a cracked spine, clear, cold, frost by dawn, wind from the north steady. It wasn't science. It was just a way of proving to myself that another day had happened, that I'd noticed it, that I was still a man who took account of things. Sarah used to laugh at me for it, said I loved that ledger more than her. I didn't, but I'll admit I told her about the weather more honestly than I told her about my heart, and I've had 11 winters to be ashamed of that. The night this begins, I opened the ledger and I didn't write anything for a long time. Because there wasn't a word for what was coming. The temperature had been falling since noon like it had somewhere to be. By dusk the water in the trough had skinned over. By full dark the sky went that terrible bruised color it gets, not black, never honest black, but a low sick yellow-gray, lit from underneath by a moon it was hiding. Snow don't fall soft in this country. It comes sideways, mean, driven by a wind off the Mogollon Rim that has crossed 100 miles of nothing and arrives hungry. I wrote 3 words, God help us. Then Pettigrew started barking at the door. Now an old dog barks at a lot of things. Coyotes, shadows, his own dreams. But there's a bark that's a complaint and a bark that's a warning, and I'd lived with that animal long enough to know the difference the way you know your own child's cough. This was the second kind. This was someone's out there. I got the door open against the wind, had to shoulder it, and the cold came in like a slap from a hand I'd wronged. And there, staggering out of the white, was Tom Ackerley's oldest boy, Silas, maybe 15, no coat, ice in his eyebrows, and his face the specific gray of a person who has run past the point where running is possible. He fell against me, I caught him, he weighed nothing. Pa, he said, just that. Then he got the rest of it out in pieces, between breaths that sounded like they were tearing something. Wagon went off the low crossing, Ma's still the baby, Boone, the baby's still out there. I have been afraid many times in my life, but I want to tell you honestly, so you understand the rest. I felt something go cold in me right then that had nothing to do with the weather. Because I knew the low crossing. I knew that in a storm like this, off a wagon in the dark, a body had maybe an hour, maybe less. And I was one old man with a bad hip and a good horse, and there was a whole world of white nothing between here and there. I put Silas by the stove and made him drink something hot, and I told him not to move, and I don't think he heard a word of it. He kept saying the baby's name. Ruth, Ruth, Ruth. Like if he said it enough she'd hear him and hold on. I saddled Juniper in the dark. Juniper was a 14-year-old buckskin mare with one white sock and the disposition of a schoolteacher who's seen it all and expects worse. She didn't want to go. I don't blame her. I didn't want to go either. But I've noticed that the wanting and the going are two different animals, and a man who waits for them to agree never does anything worth the doing. I talked to her the whole time I cinched the saddle. I do that. Another habit Sarah teased me for. "You'll bore that poor horse to death," she'd say. But a horse likes a voice in the dark, and if I'm honest, so do I. "We're gonna go out and we're gonna be fools," I told Juniper. "And if we live, I'll give you the whole apple barrel and never say another word about your feet." She flicked an ear. I chose to take it as a yes. And then we went out into it. I want you to understand what that dark was, because the whole story turns on it. It wasn't just cold and it wasn't just snow. It was erasure. The world I had known for 71 years, the fence lines, the wash, the dead cottonwood that had been my marker for 40 years, all of it was gone, swallowed, rewritten in white. My lantern threw a circle maybe 6 feet wide, and the snow filled it with sideways streaks so that even that little island of light seemed to be rushing somewhere, coming apart. Beyond it was nothing, not darkness, nothing. A blank page that hadn't decided yet whether you got to exist. I found the low crossing more by the memory in my legs than by anything I could see. Juniper found it, really. She stopped at the lip of the wash and would not go down, and I was old enough to trust that a horse who won't go somewhere has usually got a reason a man can't see. I got down, my hips screamed. I held the lantern out over the edge. And there was the wagon. On its side, half down the bank, one wheel still turning slow in the wind like it hadn't got the news yet. And beside it, thrown clear or crawled clear, a shape in the snow that was a woman. Bate Ackerley. I'd known her since she was a bride. She was on her knees in the drift with her arms wrapped around a bundle, rocking, and she was singing. I could hear it thin under the wind, some hymn. She was frozen half to death and singing to a baby, and I have carried that sound in me every day since, and I expect I'll carry it into the ground. I called her name. She didn't turn. I got down that bank on my backside, no dignity in it, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and she looked up at me with a face that had already started to leave this world, and she said, "She won't wake up, Boone. I've been singing and singing, and she won't wake up." I took the bundle. I have to tell you this part slow, because I've never told it right. The baby was cold, but not gone cold. There's a difference, and my hands knew it before my head did. There was still a little warmth deep in her, the way there's a coal deep in ash. Bate had wrapped that child in every stitch she had. Her own coat, her shawl. She'd stripped herself down to her dress in a blizzard to keep a 14-month-old alive, and it had cost her. You could see what it had cost her. She was blue at the lips and she couldn't feel her hands, and she was still trying to give the child more. That's the first thing I need you to hold on to about the people in this story. Not the ones you're expecting. This one. Bate Ackerley on her knees, giving away her own warmth by the ounce, singing so the baby wouldn't be scared of the dark. We didn't do things like that because we were good. We did them because we were people, and the people had a mother in them, and the mother doesn't stop for weather. I got Bate's arm over my shoulder, and I got the baby inside my own coat against my chest, and I turned to face the bank we had to climb. One old man, one dying woman, one child holding onto life by a thread, and I looked up that white slope, and I understood with a clarity that near stopped my heart. We were not going to make it back to the ranch. It was 2 miles, in this, uphill, with Bate already failing and me already past what my body had to give. 2 miles might as well have been the moon. I stood there in the killing wind, and I did the arithmetic no man wants to do, the arithmetic of who, and I will not pretend to you that I was noble about it. Some ugly animal part of me was already whispering that the baby had the best chance, that I could carry the baby and go faster alone, that bait was maybe already. I hated that voice, but it was there. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. And that was the moment the lights came down the far ridge. 3 of them, torches, I thought at first bobbing low, coming fast through the storm from the north side, from the country up toward the reservation line. My hand went to the rifle on Juniper's saddle out of pure old habit, the habit of 40 years of being told what those lights meant. Because they were Apache. I need to stop the story here and be honest with you, or the rest of it means nothing. I was raised to fear them, more than fear to hate, in that low, steady way you hate something you've made into less than a person so you don't have to reckon with what was done to it. I'd lost an uncle in the Cochise years. I'd sat at tables where men talked about the Apache like they talked about wolves, a problem, a danger, a thing to be cleared. I'd nodded along. God forgive me, I'd nodded along, and I'd taken land that had been theirs and I'd called it mine, and I'd written the weather in my ledger like a man with a clear conscience. So when those 3 riders came down out of the white toward me, my first feeling, I'm ashamed of it, but I owe you the truth, my first feeling was not rescue. My first feeling was now this too. They came up out of the dark and resolved into people. 2 men, and I saw as they got close, a woman older, her face lined and still, with the kind of eyes that have watched a great deal and decided to keep most of it. The younger of the 2 men swung down before his horse had fully stopped, and he didn't look at me at all. He looked at bait. He looked at the shape of a woman freezing to death, and something moved across his face that I recognized, because I'd felt it not 1 minute before, and it was not the face of an enemy. It was the face of a man doing arithmetic, the same arithmetic, who, how fast. He said something to the older woman in a language I didn't have. She was already off her horse and pulling a rolled hide from behind her saddle. And the young man looked at me, finally looked at me straight, and there was no love in it, and there was no hate in it either. There was just the storm and the dying woman and the plain fact of the thing, and he said, in English rough but clear, "She lives if we move now. Your place is too far." He jerked his chin north into the wind. "Ours is close. Ours is close." 2 words. And every year of what I'd been taught rose up in me and said, you don't know what's up there. You don't hand a white woman and a baby to, and I want you to see this clearly, because this is the emotionally and morally heavy thing I did that night, the thing I've turned over 10,000 times since. I looked at that young Apache man in the snow, and I chose to believe him. I don't want to make it sound easy or fine. It wasn't a triumph of my character. It was that bait was dying in my arms and the arithmetic didn't care about my grandfather's stories, and some part of me older and truer than my fear looked at that man's face and just knew. The way you know a bark that's a warning from a bark that's a complaint. I looked at him, and I saw a man who could not stand to watch a mother die in the snow, and I have met few enough of those in my life that I was not about to turn one away because of the color of him. "North," I said, "lead." Something eased in his shoulders, just a little, and he nodded once and then he did a thing I did not expect, a thing I still think about. He took off his own outer robe, heavy hide, lined with something warm, and he wrapped it around Bait Ackerley with his own hands, quick and sure, and he lifted her like she weighed nothing onto the front of his horse and held her there against him, and he never once made it into a speech about what he was doing. He just did it, the way Bait had stripped herself for the baby. The way people do the largest things in the smallest, quietest way, without ever announcing that they've become, for one moment, more than they had to be. The older woman came to me and reached for the bundle inside my coat, and every fear I had came screaming back, "No, not the baby. You don't take the baby," and I near pulled away. She saw it. Of course she saw it. She'd been watching men look at her that way her whole life. She stopped. She held my eyes, and she said in careful English, slow, so I'd hear every word, I have buried 3 of my own. I do not let the small ones go into the cold. Not yours, not mine, not any. She held out her hands again, steady, patient, and there was a terrible dignity in her that made me ashamed down to my boots. You are old and you are afraid, and the child is dying while you decide whether I am a person. I gave her the baby. God help me. I gave a freezing Apache grandmother a white settler's child in the middle of a blizzard, on nothing but the look in her eyes, and it was the best decision I have ever made. And I did not know yet how much it was going to cost us all. She tucked little Ruth against her body, inside her own robes, murmuring something low, not English, not for me, a sound older than any language I knew, the sound a woman makes to a child who is trying to leave, and she turned her horse north. And we rode, 5 souls and a baby, out of a wrecked wagon at the low crossing into the worst of it, toward a place I'd been taught my whole life to fear, on the word of a man I'd known for the length of one terrible decision. The wind took the lantern in the first quarter mile, just tore it out of my hand and put out its little light, and I let it go. Out there, that circle of 6 feet had felt like everything I had. Losing it should have finished me. It didn't, because the young man ahead of me knew the country the way I knew my own ledger, knew it blind, knew it by the fall of the land under his horse and the change in the wind between one rise and the next, and I did the second unfamiliar thing of that night after choosing to trust him. I followed, in the dark, where I could not see, trusting a man of a people I'd been taught could not be trusted, because he could find in the storm what I could not, and because Bate Ackerley's life was riding on his chest. We climbed, the horses labored. Juniper stayed nose to tail behind the woman with the baby, and I bent low over her neck and talked to her the whole way, though the wind ate every word before it left my mouth. Good girl. Almost. I lied about the apples. You can have 2 barrels. Almost. Almost. I lost time. The cold does that. It takes minutes off you when you're not looking, and you can't ever prove they're gone. I know we crossed a frozen creek because I heard the ice complain. I know I near fell twice. I know that at some point the young man dropped back beside me without a word and put his hand flat against my shoulder, not gripping. Just there. Just here, old man, I've got you. Stay in the world a while longer, and rode like that beside me for a stretch, one hand keeping a stranger's father from tipping off his horse into the snow. Nobody taught me they did things like that. Nobody ever told me. That's the thing I keep coming back to, all these years later, when I'm alone with the ledger and the 11 winters, and now this other, heavier thing I carry. All those years of stories about them, and not one of them told me the truest thing, that a man who has buried his own children will ride into a blizzard for yours, and hold you up with his own tired hand, and never once ask you to be grateful. We came over the last rise, and there was light below. Fires, sheltered in the lee of a rock face, banked and glowing, and shapes moving between them, and I heard voices call out as they saw us, sharp, urgent, the voices of people who had been waiting, who had known their people rode out into death and had kept the fires burning against their return. Figures ran up to meet us. Hands reached for Bate, for the baby, for me, pulling us down off the horses into that circle of light and warmth and the smell of wood smoke and hide and something cooking. And I remember thinking in the days of it that I had spent my whole life afraid of the wrong thing. They laid Bate by the biggest fire. The grandmother knelt with the baby, and other women crowded close, and there was a sudden terrible flurry of movement and low, fast talk, and I couldn't see. I pushed forward and couldn't see, and the young man held me back with an arm across my chest, gently but firm, and said low, "Let them work. They know cold. They have always known cold." So I stood at the edge of the firelight, shaking, useless, an old settler in an Apache camp in the worst storm in 40 years, and I watched strangers fight to keep a white mother and a white child in the world. And then the grandmother went very still over the baby. And she looked up. And across all that firelight and steam and snow, she found my eyes and her face. I couldn't read it. I couldn't read it, and my heart came apart in my chest not knowing, and I took a step toward them, and the young man's arm tightened across me, and Bates stirred by the fire and made a sound, and somewhere a woman began softly to sing. The grandmother looked up and her face broke, but not the way I feared. It broke the way ice breaks over running water. Something underneath it that had been held still for a long, terrible minute came loose all at once, and she pressed the baby harder against her chest and made a sound I will not try to spell, half a laugh and half a sob, the sound a person makes when the world hands back a thing they'd already begun to let go of. She breathes, she said, then louder to the whole circle, to the fires, to the storm itself. She breathes. And the camp let out a breath it had been holding. I don't know how to make you feel what that was. To stand shaking at the edge of a light you were raised to fear and hear a woman you'd known for 4 minutes announce that a child would live, and to hear the joy of it go around a ring of strangers like water poured out, everyone touched by it, no one asking whose child, no one asking whose people. Just, the small one stays. My knees went. The young man caught me under the arm before I hit the ground, the same hand that had held me on the horse, and lowered me down onto a hide by the fire like I was something that could break, and I suppose I was. "Sit," he said, "you have done your part." But I hadn't. That was the thing. I hadn't done the worst of it yet, and none of us knew. They worked on Bait a long time. I watched from my hide with a blanket thrown over me, and a bowl of something hot pushed into my hands that I couldn't hold steady enough to drink. The women had her stripped and wrapped in warm hides with 2 of them lying against her, giving her their own body's heat, and I understood then what the young man had meant. They know cold. They have always known cold. We settlers built walls against the winter and thought that made us its master. These people had learned to share it, to spread it thin across many bodies, so it couldn't kill any one of them. There was a knowledge in that fire circle older than my grandfather's guns, and it was saving a woman my grandfather's stories would have said didn't matter to them at all. Bait came back slow, first a sound, then a shudder. Then, near an hour in, she opened her eyes and found the firelight and the baby laid warm beside her, and she reached one blue-white hand out and touched Ruth's face, and she wept without any strength to it, just water running sideways off her cheek into the hide. I made myself get up. I went and knelt by her, my hip a live coal, and she saw me and her cracked lips moved. "Boone. I'm here, Bait, the baby's here, you're safe now, you're—" And then her face changed. Whatever piece had been on it went out like the lantern had, and she gripped my wrist with a strength that had no business being in a hand that cold, and she said the 2 words that turned the whole night over and dropped us all back into the dark. "Where's Tom?" I didn't understand. "Sila's is at my place, safe by the stove. He ran and got me, he's—" Not Sila's. Her eyes were wild now and awake, more awake than the rest of her. "Tom, my husband, he was driving. When the wagon went he threw me clear with the baby, Boone. He pushed us off before it went down the bank, and I heard him. I heard him after. He was calling, and I couldn't get to him. I couldn't stand, and then I couldn't hear him any more." The fire cracked. Somewhere the wind found a new gap in the rocks and moaned through it. Nobody had found Tom Ackerley, because nobody had known to look. We'd pulled Bait and the baby from beside the wagon and ridden north and left a man out there in the killing dark, alive maybe, alive when she last heard him, calling for a wife who couldn't come. He'd been out there the whole time we rode to safety. The whole hour they'd worked to warm his family. Every minute we'd spent being saved, Tom Ackerley had been spending too, somewhere back down that white slope, and he did not have any more minutes to spare. I got to my feet, I don't know how. "How long?" I said. "How long since you heard him?" Bates' face told me she knew what she was asking. "Before you came," she whispered. "Long before." 2 hours then, maybe more, in this. I have told you the arithmetic already. You know what it said. It said Tom Ackerley was dead. It said no man survives 2 hours thrown from a wagon into a blizzard, likely hurt, likely bleeding, likely pinned. The numbers were plain and they were cruel and they were, I was near certain, correct. And I turned to tell the young man so. To say the thing old men say, it's too late, there's no point, we'd only lose more, the sensible thing, the arithmetic thing. He was already pulling on a fresh robe. He looked at me while he did it, and he'd heard every word Bates said. And he understood the numbers as well as I did, better. He knew this cold better than any man alive, and he was going anyway. You'll die, I told him. You know you'll die, he's already gone. Maybe, he cinched the robe. His face was tired in a way I hadn't let myself see before. He'd been out in this before he ever found us. He'd already given his warm robe to Bate hours ago. He was running on the same empty I was. But maybe is a word, and a man is out in the cold with that word still on him. He looked toward Bate, toward the baby. She will ask her whole life whether we tried. The child will grow up on the answer. He pulled the hood up. I will not give them no. And the grandmother, kneeling by the baby, said something to him low and fierce in their own tongue, and I did not need the words. I have a son I let become a stranger. I know the sound of a mother telling her boy not to go, and I know the sound of a boy going anyway. He didn't answer her. He just touched her face once, quick, the way he'd touched my shoulder on the mountain. Then he looked at me. And here is the second heavy thing I did that night, the one that sits even heavier than the first. I said, I'm coming. 71 years old, bad hip, already spent past spending, every sensible cell in my body screaming to stay by the fire and be warm and be alive. And I stood up and I said, I'm coming, because I had followed this man blind through the dark once already tonight and lived, and because I could not sit by a fire and be saved while he rode out to try to undo the leaving that I had been part of. I'd left Tom out there too. I'd ridden past him in the dark. My saving of Bate and Ruth was built on a man I hadn't known to look for, and I could not carry that in my ledger both. Something had to be answered for. You cannot, the young man said. You have nothing left. Neither do you. I was already moving toward Juniper, who lifted her tired head and gave me a look of such profound betrayal that under any other circumstance I'd have laughed. So we'll have nothing left together. Two fools is faster than one. Something crossed his face, not a smile, but the near country of one. Your horse will not last. Then we'll walk her home over our shoulders. I got the girth tightened. My hands had stopped shaking. That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes the moment you stop being afraid isn't when you're safe. It's when you finally decide the fear doesn't get a vote. Lead. I follow, same as before. He looked at me a long second, and then he told me his name. He hadn't before. There'd been no time and maybe no reason. You don't exchange names with a stranger in the middle of dying. But he told me now, before we rode back out, because I think he knew what the numbers said as well as I did, and a man wants his name carried by someone if he's about to spend it. Nate, he said. Boone, I told him, though he hadn't asked. I know, he said, the old man who talks to his horse. We have watched you 3 winters. And there it was, the near smile finally arriving all the way. You are very boring to the horse. And then we rode back out into the thing that wanted us, 2 fools and 1 exhausted mare, down the white slope toward a man the arithmetic said was already dead. I won't stretch the search out for you. The storm doesn't allow for stretching. It was brutal and it was blind and it was the longest hour of my long life, and I will tell it to you the way it happened, quick and hard, the way it took him. We found Tom Ackerley by the sound. Nate stopped his horse on the flat below the crossing and held up a hand and cocked his head, and I heard nothing but wind, and he heard something else, and he turned toward it, and we found Tom pinned under the wagon's forward axle where he'd been thrown, both legs trapped. A mile of snow drifted up his side, and he was alive. He was alive. 2 hours and more, and Tom Ackerley was alive, because he'd fallen into a hollow that broke the wind and he'd kept himself talking. He told us later he'd recited every psalm he knew and then started making them up. And because Tom Ackerley was a stubborn, spiteful, hard-headed man who had apparently decided that dying was a thing that happened to people who gave the weather the satisfaction, and he was not going to give it the satisfaction. The arithmetic had been wrong. That's the thing I need you to hold on to. All my sensible numbers, all my old man certainty, wrong. A man was alive who could not possibly be alive, because Nature had refused to accept no on his behalf. But the cold keeps its books too, and it does not forgive a night twice. Getting Tom free took everything. The axle had him, and the wagon had settled, and it took the two of us levering with a broken singletree while Tom screamed through his teeth. And when he came loose, one leg came with a wrongness to it that meant it was broken bad, and he couldn't walk, couldn't stand. And now we had a full-grown man who couldn't move and two exhausted horses and a mare who was finished, truly finished, standing splay-legged with her sides heaving. We got Tom onto Nature's horse. It was the only one with anything left, and that meant Nate walked. He gave up his horse to a man he'd never met, and he walked in the deep snow at the end of a night that had already emptied him, uphill, into the wind. I offered him Juniper. He wouldn't take her, said she couldn't carry his weight the distance, and he was right. And we both knew that what he was really saying was that one of us had to be able to still ride hard for the camp if the other went down, and it wasn't going to be the 71-year-old. So he walked, and I rode beside him, and Tom moaned draped over Nature's horse, and we started up the long white slope for the second time that night. He made it most of the way. He made it that's what breaks me. He made it nearly all the way home. We were close enough that I thought I could see the glow of the fires against the cloud, close enough that I'd started to believe, close enough that I let myself think the numbers had been wrong twice. And Nate just slowed. That's all. He didn't fall dramatic. There was no cry. He just slowed, and then he stopped, and he stood in the snow with his hand on his horse's flank and his head down. And when I turned back and rode to him, he looked up at me, and his face was calm and far away, and I knew that face. I'd seen it on bait at the low crossing. It was the face of someone the cold has started to talk to, someone it's begun to convince that sitting down would be all right, that the dark is soft, that they could rest just for a moment. Nate, no, get on the horse. Tom is on the horse, slow, reasonable, terrible, there is no room. Then walk, move your feet, move them, you hear me, move. And I did the thing. I did the only thing. I got down off Juniper, down into the deep snow, hip screaming, no strength, no sense, and I got Nature's arm over my shoulders the way I'd gotten Bates hours before, and I tried to hold up the man who'd held me up, the man who'd taken off his own robe, the man who'd put his hand flat on my back in the dark and kept me in the world. I tried. God as my witness, I tried. But I was an old spent man, and he was a grown one gone loose and heavy, and I couldn't carry him. My legs went, and we both went down into the snow together, and I lay there with his weight across me, and I screamed toward the glow on the cloud, screamed for the camp, screamed until something in my throat tore, and I don't know if anyone could have heard it over that wind. But someone did. Lights came down the slope, torches bobbing, coming fast, and I laughed, or sobbed, because it was the exact thing I'd feared at the start of the whole night. Apache lights coming out of the storm toward me, and now they were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life, and how's that for the whole story told in a single picture by the thing I was raised to dread, coming to save us all. They got Nate, 4 of them strong, fast, they got him up and wrapped and running back toward the fires with him. They got Tom. They got me. A young one hauled me up bodily and half carried me, and I let him, I who would once have died before letting an Apache man's hands take my weight, I leaned on him and let him carry me home. Nate died just before dawn. The women worked on him the way they'd worked on Bait, the same fierce, patient warmth, the same bodies pressed close to give what heat they had. The grandmother knelt over him all night the way she'd knelt over the baby, and it wasn't enough, because he'd already given it away, you see. The robe hours ago, the horse, the walking. He'd spent his warmth by the ounce, exactly the way Bate had spent hers for the baby, giving it out to stranger after stranger until there wasn't any left in him to save. He'd known. Standing by that fire pulling his robe on, he'd known the numbers. And he'd gone anyway, because a man was out in the cold with the word maybe still on him. Tom Ackerley lived. Lost 2 toes and the use of that leg was never right again, but he lived, and he walked his daughter down the aisle 19 years later on a cane and a limp. And he named his next son a name that wasn't his to give and gave it anyway, and told the boy every year on the anniversary exactly whose name he carried, and exactly what it had cost. Bate lived. Ruth lived. The baby who was gone cold in my arms, the one the arithmetic had written off, the one who never should have made it out of that wash alive, she made it. She's a grandmother herself now. I held her hand at her wedding because Tom couldn't cross the church fast enough and somebody had to, and I am not a man who cries, and I cried like a broke dam, and only the grandmother, old by then, older than seemed possible, only she knew exactly why. She sat beside me at that wedding, the 2 of us the last ones left who'd been on the mountain, and she took my hand in her dry old one, and neither of us said a word, because there weren't any that would hold it. I go up there sometimes still, to the rock face where the fires were. There's nothing left of the camp. That country changed. Those people were moved again, the way they always were, the way I was part of, the way I took land and wrote the weather in my ledger with a clear conscience I no longer have and am glad to be rid of. But I go up there, and I say his name out loud so the wind can carry it, the way he wanted it carried. Nate, the young man who did the arithmetic and got the right answer and paid it. I still keep the ledger. 71 winters became 89 and counting, and every night I write the weather down, clear and cold, frost by dawn, wind from the north. Sarah always said I loved that ledger too much. Maybe. But there's one page I've never let anyone read near the back, where the writing's shaky and the ink ran because the hand that held the pen was shaking, and it doesn't say anything about the weather at all. It just says the name. And underneath, the only true thing I know how to say about that night, the thing I got wrong my whole life and got right for 1 hour in the freezing dark. They were people, they were always people, and nobody ever told me. I don't go up there in winter anymore. My hip won't have it, and besides, I don't need the cold to remember. The cold and I settled our account a long time ago, on a white slope, close enough to the fires to see them. Some nights, though, when the wind comes down off the rim and finds the gap under the door and makes that sound like a hurt animal, I still go to the door, and I open it, and I look out into the white. Just in case somebody's out there. Just in case there's still one last chance.